We call to order the meeting of the Colerain Township Zoning Commission for Tuesday, August the 20th, 2019. Would everybody please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you and welcome to all this evening. Mr. Urbanzik, if we could have roll call, please.
Mr. Faring?
Here.
Ms. McMullen?
Here.
Mrs. Smith?
Here.
Mr. Westfall?
Here.
Mr. Grady?
Here. At this time, we ask everybody if they would please silence their electronic devices, telephones, whatever might make noise. And commissioners and staff, if you'll double check, make sure you have your microphones on. First item on the agenda for approval is for the minutes of July 16th, 2019. Commissioners, if you'd please take a note, and if there are no changes to be heard, if somebody will make a motion.
I'll make a motion that we accept the minutes as presented.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes as presented to us. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, the minutes stand to be approved. The next item is public address. This is the time where anybody in the audience would like to address the commission on any topic that is not on the agenda. So is there anyone who has anything they'd like to bring forth to the commission? Hearing none, we will move on. We will start with item number 4, final development plan for case number ZA2011-0 for Panda Express, 9679 Colerain Avenue. Staff, do we have a report?
Yes, this is an application for a final development plan submitted by Henry Clover of Clover Architects, representing Panda Express. This is a final plan based on a preliminary plan that was reviewed by this commission in June at their meeting. That was a preliminary development plan, which basically changed the use of this property from a branch bank with drive-through to a restaurant with drive-through. Public hearing was held at that time. It was recommended for approval to the Township trustees, and then the Township trustees has confirmed that rezoning. This particular property is on Colerain Avenue on the east side of Northgate Mall, just out from the Ulta store. There's currently 136 parking spaces at this site. We saw some of this at the preliminary stage. It's right next to Mall Drive at Colerain Avenue. This is one of many out parcels that were approved back in 2011. This is actually the last of those out parcels that were planned to be accounted for. This actually, at your last meeting out in the lobby, there was a large display of Colerain Avenue plans that were submitted, and also a redevelopment plan for Northgate Mall. That redevelopment plan basically affected the mall structure itself, but not the out parcels. This out parcel was still being recommended. As a matter of fact, that out parcel almost looks a little like a Panda Express. I don't know if the architect intended for that to happen, but that's how that fits into that newer plan for Northgate Mall. This is the final development plan which has been submitted. The site plan calls for a drive-through. It has proper stacking. Actually, this whole planning process started back in April, so we've had a lot of time to work with the applicant about all the zoning things, and this is totally compliant with Colerain zoning with 2 exceptions. One is the parking, and there's a variance request. First is that the Ulta parking be added to this site, and that was actually by an easement agreement through the mall, because that store actually the front door of the store faces this particular site, and there would be no other adjacent parking if it wasn't for this. And then for the Panda Express, they've requested an additional 19 spaces over what we would typically permit for a restaurant this size. The question became that they have probably more sit-down customers than your typical drive-through restaurant, so they would like to have additional parking. They've submitted a landscape plan. It calls for 25 trees and 166 shrubs. Currently, there are no trees or shrubs on the property, so this will be kind of a nice addition. They are also proposing the 4 decorative street lamps that ring the Northgate Mall. This will fill in the gap where there currently are no decorative street lamps. At your last meeting, there was some discussion. The initial proposal did not have a street-facing customer entry. They have revised the plan so that there is actually 2 doors, but one will face Colerain Avenue. So just to bring that to your attention, that issue has been resolved. This is the elevation drawing for the building. This would be the side facing Colerain Avenue. The other variance request is for signs. They're requesting an additional 76.57 square feet of wall signs. This is consistent with other requests for out parcels in Northgate Mall. The key thing for those properties versus a typical freestanding structure is that they're viewed from all 4 sides. They're approached from all 4 sides, so they want to have sign allowances on all 4 sides. And as you see with these drawings, the question is whether these signs seem to be proportional to the size of the building. Also call your attention, that's the street-facing front door. This is the Mall Drive facing elevation with a wall sign. This is the side that would face the Longhorn Steak, or the north side of the building. And the back of the building, which faces Alta. Staff is recommending for approval of this final development plan as submitted to allow for the proposed restaurant with drive-through with the following variances. Number 1, a variance from section 15.8.3G of the zoning resolution to allow for additional 76.57 square feet of wall signs. Also a variance from section 13.2.2 and 13.3.4 of the zoning resolution to allow for an additional 37 parking spaces, and that includes the 18 spaces designated for Alta. So are there any questions? This is not a public hearing. Public hearing was held at your last meeting, or at the June meeting for this.
Commissioners, any questions of staff? Mr. Kaler, I would just like to clarify the 76.57 square feet. That's to be divided among the 4 sides. It's not 76 on each of the 4 sides.
Correct. That's in total.
Okay.
We also have a representative of the architect present if you have questions on the design.
Commissioners, any other questions for staff?
I just have one. The 37 parking spaces, including the 18 for Alta, so we're actually only giving them 19 extra, is that correct?
No, we're giving 37 spaces extra.
But it says it's including the 18 spaces, at least in my paperwork, designated for Alta. That's a different store, right?
Yeah. It's basically off-site parking because this actually is a separate freestanding lot. So 18 for Alta, 19 for Panda Express, for a total of 37 over the maximum allowance.
Okay.
So totally, how many would there be?
Oh, I don't remember. It's not in your staff report.
It says 58 was what it was originally called for.
58 plus 18.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I'm sorry about that. No, okay.
So that would be 76 parking space?
Total, Do I have that number in here?
95.
Correct. You wouldn't happen to have the total number of parking spaces on the site?
76 total.
Okay, 76.
76.
Yeah.
Would the applicant like to make a presentation or comments, sir? And if you'd state your name, spell your last name, and your address, please.
Henry Clover, Klover, so I am the architect. I'm at 10955 Lowell Avenue, Overland Park, Kansas. I've had the privilege and the pleasure of being one of Panda's architects for over 25 years. Very much my pleasure to be here tonight. Marty did an excellent job, so there's not a whole lot to say. But when you're dealing with a large shopping center, particularly one that's going to get rejuvenated, parking is an issue because, you know, Panda has their requirements by themselves, but when you get these overall shopping centers, like for example, Ulta is parking on their lot, and they will park on their lot as well as other people. So it's not a function of need as much as it's the area. You know, 18 parking spaces are not enough for an Ulta, not when they're busy on a Saturday. And so it's really just a shared use model more than anything else. Very much appreciate the opportunity on the signage. Obviously, Panda is very tasteful. They have the round lockups, very much like your logo, that are, you know, only 36 square feet. The 6-foot signs are 36 square feet. The 5-foot signs are 25 square feet. And the front sign is obviously the largest. So appreciate your consideration. I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Commissioners, any questions?
No, I just have a comment. I do appreciate you taking under suggestion us wanting a front door on the building, as well as the greenery that you're putting into the area.
I hope you'll be very proud. Panda is a very good operator, very good tenant and neighbor.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you, sir. At this time, I believe we're ready to entertain a motion if one of the commissioners would want to make a motion on this particular item.
I'll make a motion to approve Panda Express case number ZA 2011-04 with the two recommendations from the staff, 1 and 2, the variances.
Okay, it's been moved to approve this as is presented. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded to approve this. Commissioners, any final discussion or questions? Mr. Urbancic, could we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Faring,
Yes.
Mrs. McMullen,
Yes.
Mrs. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Westfall,
Aye.
Mr. Grody.
Yes. Motion passes.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations, sir. When will the first meal be served?
Drawings are already in, and I turned in a zoning certificate and a check to Marty this evening, so as soon as we can get it permitted and get it built.
Good,
So it'll go as fast as we can.
good, good.
Appreciate it.
Okay, we move on to case number ZA 2014-07, Kroger Marketplace, located 3636 Springdale Road. Does staff have a presentation?
Yes, this is an application submitted by Tommy Cooper with Syntec Construction. He's representing the property owner Kroger Limited Partnerships 1. This property at 3636 Springdale Road was approved back in 2014, initially by Zoning Commission. There were 2 time extensions granted to get the project started. This project was substantially completed back last December. They had their grand opening. And as per our standard procedure, when properties are going to be opened, and issued a certificate of occupancy through the county's building department, they contact me and ask for verification that the site's in compliance with zoning, and that happens with anything that's commercial in Colerain. So I go out, plans in hand, and physically inspect the site to make sure that everything that's built on site meets what's called for in the plans, and it's called for by code. Back in December, they were still in the midst of getting the site finished graded. The county grants temporary certificates of occupancy to allow commercial businesses to open, even though there are miscellaneous things that still need to be done. Now, those miscellaneous things cannot include any kind of life safety type things. And typically they're based on zoning and site outdoors things. And in December, they were having a hard time getting the landscaping together as well as signage, and there was a punch list of about a dozen things. All of those things were corrected except for one rather problematic issue, that the landscape architect did not plant the proper size tree, caliper size. Our trees are sized by how they measure, they say at breast height. They're supposed to be 2.5 inches, which is a pretty substantial sized tree. When I went out on the site, the trees were measuring between 1.5 and 2 inches. And so I issued a notice to the building department and to the applicant that your trees are subsized. And this was 80-some trees. I should know that number right offhand, 86 trees. And you know, my heart kind of falls when I see this because I know the corrective measure is going to be pretty substantial on this. I was in the same situation about a year ago with a commercial business that opened, and their trees were much smaller. They were like in the 1 to 1.5 inch caliper, but I said, you know, we call for 2.5 inch caliper, and that's what needs to happen. And so I go out, and they're yanking the trees out and throwing them in the dumpster. And they cannot necessarily restock or reuse these trees. So we have 88 trees that could potentially be scrapped. And they're tall trees. They're a little lanky. I don't know if you've been out to the Kroger site to see what they look like. Here's a few pictures that Jesse took just a few days ago. But they're viable trees. There are some that still need to be replaced because they died, and the contractor is aware of that. There was also a place where there were 2 trees missing, and they were in a tree island that contains underground utilities and an electric box. And because of those underground utilities, they can plant shrubs, but they can't plant trees or anything that's going to penetrate deep into the ground. Since those things are code requirements and they are approved with the final development plan as staff, we cannot administratively waive those things. They're basically a variance request by this board. So first suggestion was, well, you need to take all 80-some trees out and replace them with 2.5 inch trees. And in talking with Kroger, they basically said, okay, what of value can we do to mitigate this? And through several back and forths, the commitment came that they would donate 45 trees to the township to be used in public spaces, and they would be the 1.5 to 2 inch caliper, which is the same size as at the Kroger. That seemed to be more beneficial than basically scrapping trees, I guess, in my mind. So that is basically the appeal. The request is for a variance, and that changes the numbers in that tree table on the landscape plan that they were previously listed at 2.5 inch caliper. Now they would be 1.5 inch caliper, knowing that most of these trees actually exceed 1.5 that's on site. They're more in the 2 inch range. And the other thing is to change that tree island that has the underground utilities to eliminate those 2 trees. So Kroger representatives do propose to donate 45 deciduous shade trees to the Colerain Township and plant them in locations that would be beneficial to the township. These trees would be in the 1.5 to 2 inch caliper range. And then the staff recommendation is for approval of that final development plan to modify the landscape plan to eliminate the 2 trees in the tree island near the fuel station due to conflicts with underground utilities, And secondly, to modify the landscape tree size table with a variance to retain the 1.5 to 2 inch caliper trees that have been planted. And I will say that I believe this was a oversight, not necessarily intentional thing to avert complying with zoning. And then secondly, I wouldn't necessarily want to say that this is a policy that we would want to carry forward. It is somewhat an unusual circumstance, and we would not want to create a policy to accept less than standard required zoning trees in the future. Any questions? Mr. Cooper is here tonight if you want to ask any questions.
Commission members, any questions or comments for staff?
Is there any consideration in adding the same amount of trees, the 86 to 45 ratio?
Well, actually, we started much lower than 45 and worked up to 45. I mean, at a certain point, if they're providing that many trees, it would make sense for them to go back and essentially rip out all the trees and do the 2.5. And then Colerain wouldn't have any public benefit trees. So it's kind of a balance somewhere in there.
But they're planting the trees also, right?
Yes, it includes planting.
Mr. Cooper, would you like to make a comment where?
Yes, thank you.
If you'll state your name and spell it, then your address, please.
Yes, Tommy Cooper, Cooper. I represent Syntec Construction. Syntec has been building Kroger stores for about 25 years. And I've worked with Mr. Kohler. To be quite honest, I was unaware that the trees were not that size. We had, if you recall, the fall that we had was exceptionally wet. We struggled up until the last few days just to get the parking lot in. Our landscaper, Pro Grounds Care, owned by Lottie Morita, he also has been doing Kroger stores for about 30 years. And he thought he was doing the right thing by taking trees. He basically could not get trees that were 2.5 inches. And he took it upon himself to make that decision. We've since talked to him about that. He is agreed to supply and plant the 45 trees. And we certainly take this as a serious offense and will not do it again. We felt like rather than pulling out trees and honestly disrupting the operation of the Kroger store, we felt this was a better option and certainly shows our commitment to doing the right thing.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Before you leave, sir, any questions, comments for Mr. Cooper?
I got one question. It may or may not relate, but will they be removing any trees by the fuel station?
No.
Because there's a tree that's growing by the fuel station where the stop sign is, that's growing over the stop sign.
I'll be happy to look at that.
Okay, thank you.
You're saying the tree by the stop sign?
Right, it's hard to see the stop sign.
Okay. I'll be happy to look at that.
Thank you.
Mr. Kaler, in your recommendation language on our papers that we have, do we need to include language in there about the donation of the 45 trees, and do we need to specify what types of trees they will be?
Short answer is no. The long answer is it is not considered to be, I guess, a legally correct thing to do to accept off-site donations in exchange. We have a verbal commitment. I believe that verbal commitment is solid.
Okay.
But in a development plan process, we cannot require off-site improvements as part of that. But it's a very good question.
Okay.
And it's a good thing for you to know that we cannot actually make that a requirement.
Okay.
And that's why I'm saying it's a commitment by Kroger.
Do we have any kind of idea what types of trees they will be?
Yeah, they did submit a list, primarily maples, or what they're doing, we're looking at possibly doing some street tree replacements. So some of these would be in that location, and maples are good street trees.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any other questions or comments? Would someone be prepared to make a motion on this matter?
I'll make a motion that we accept Kroger's Marketplace case ZA 2014-07, Kroger Marketplace as presented.
Second.
There's a second, okay. Commissioners, any final questions or comments regarding the motion? Mr. Urbanzik, could we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Ferring,
Yes.
Mr. McMullen,
Yes.
Mrs. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Westfall,
Aye.
Mr. Grody.
Yes, motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Thank you so much. Okay, we move on to public hearing section of our agenda, and the first case is number ZA 2002-02, Jeff Wyler Honda, 8944 Colerain Avenue. Mr. Taylor, do we have a report?
Yes, I do. This is a modification to a development plan that was initiated back in 2002 for Jeff Wyler Honda. This is on the east side of Colerain Avenue, south of Pool Road, south of Target as well. The property that is owned by it's actually Mountain Agency Colerain LLC is the property owner, has 3 separate zoning designations right now. Part that faces Colerain Avenue at the corner of Pool is Zone B2, which is general business. The part that was amended back in 2002 that was added, the PDB, was previously zoned single-family residential. And I have an older aerial that shows there were a couple single-family houses on that property. And the remainder of what was actually the Moose property, which has been purchased by Wyler, is zoned currently R6, which is urban residential, and the proposal is to add that to the PDB for the purpose of expanding the parking area for inventory vehicles. This kind of gives you an idea. This is 2001 aerial photograph before the last expansion. The area that was expanded, let me get my little pointer thing going, had single-family houses. The Moose Lodge was zoned single-family residential, and fraternal organizations or private recreational clubs are a conditional use within residential zones, so that wasn't allowable use. That proposal used this green space in front of the Moose Lodge and created that, or converted that to parking area, and also where this house used to stand. And at that same time, Pool Road was extended to the east. Sunnyside Drive, which is a private driveway, used to actually bisect the auto dealership. So that portion of Sunnyside Drive is no longer in existence. This is the dealership as it looks today on Colerain Avenue. Another view of it. The Honda sign is actually non-conforming for height. It's okay for size. This is another view. This is actually the Ford dealership immediately to the south. Note that their monument sign in front does meet the current specifications for size and height. Directly across the street is Farbach Warner Nature Preserve. To the north is a Meineke shop, other auto-related things. Note the billboard that's in the picture. That's a non-conforming billboard. This is the Moose Lodge, the actual lodge building itself. The auto dealer is currently using the former Moose Lodge parking lot as an inventory storage lot. This is the north side of the Moose Lodge as seen from Sunnyside Drive. This is what Sunnyside Drive looks like, private driveway that's shared by, I believe, 4 single-family houses. Going further back on Sunnyside Drive, there's some substantially large pine trees, and those are on the Moose property, or now the Wyler Honda property. And you'll see further on that the landscape plan calls for retaining those trees rather than cutting them down and putting new screening in that place. Another view of Sunnyside. This is the very end of Sunnyside. This is the start of the applicant's preliminary development plan. This shows basically what I showed on the aerial with the 3 different zoning classifications that we currently have. This is overlaying the aerial photo showing the Moose property to the back. I had a hard time figuring out what that was behind it, and it's actually horseshoe pits. It looks interesting in the aerial photographs. This is the parking. There is a zoning variance request built into this that they have no internal landscape islands because they are doing this primarily for just parking of inventory cars. This is not a customer parking area. Also, that they not have parking spaces with direct access to aisles. There's a few parking spaces down here where they're kind of double stacked. And that they use existing vegetation as a buffer. And I think that shows up, on the landscape plan. The area in that green circle is the area where those tall pine trees or currently are. There's a stormwater detention pond here at the back of the property. That would catch the stormwater from this paved area and have a controlled release. They've submitted a photometric lighting plan. The lighting is not terribly bright back here, but the poles are taller than what they would have in the privacy fences. By the way, the landscape plan calls for a privacy fence and landscaping around the perimeter where it abuts single-family houses or single-family zoning. The property that's zoned single-family directly to the south of this is vacant, and it's actually owned by the Ford dealership to the south. This is a landscape plan that they provided for the previous area that's B2 and PDB that was approved back in 2002. They're calling for 13 deciduous trees, 4 evergreen trees, that total of 17 trees. And that kind of brings up some points that I think I need to bring your attention. Back in 2002, there were conditions on that approval to allow for the expansion onto that Moose front yard plus the single-family homes that were taken down. They were to submit a detailed landscape plan, which we did have a landscape plan submitted. That actually called for more than double the amount of trees than they're currently proposing in that old B2 and PDB section. There was a requirement that no off-premises signage be allowed on the property. There is a non-conforming billboard. It was to be used as on-site advertising. They continue to use it for off-premise advertising, although one side is for Wyler, one side is off-premise advertising. The final development plan was to comply with other aspects of the zoning regulations. Unloading of inventory, including vehicles, be done on the project site only. We're aware that they routinely load and unload on Pool Road. and a variance be granted for the parking spaces to not allow direct access, which is part of the current request. This is the previous plan. And again, it has more than double the amount of trees that are being proposed now, both along Pool Road, a little bit back where it transitions to Sunnyside Drive, and a couple trees up towards Colerain Avenue. This is the non-conforming billboard that's being used for off-premise signage. This, thanks to Google Street View, actually 2 of the Google Street Views taken like a year apart indicate that they do use Pool Road, which is this is the actual road for unloading and loading. That area to the right was where that landscaping that was approved in 2002 was supposed to have been planted. That was never done. As a matter of fact, what they do is they actually park cars on that landscape strip. And they even block the sidewalk on Pool Road, which brings up a concern for us. They even show up on the aerial photograph. You see that line of cars, that's all grass where they're parked. This is a separate view taken like a year later. So it's not necessarily just a one-time incident, which is a bit of a concern for staff. Also, you recall the big display that we saw last meeting out in the lobby was the Colerain Avenue revitalization plan. That plan called for trying to get some greenery along Colerain Avenue in terms of just buffer strips to get the pavement back from the sidewalk and to provide some street trees, to provide some shade, a little bit of relief from the current sea of asphalt that we have. With that said, staff is recommending for approval, and this is a preliminary development plan. They will have to come back with a final development plan, which would deal with all the site development details. Actually, they have submitted more detail than is required for a preliminary development plan. Things like the photometrics and landscaping, we typically deal with the final. In some of my preliminary meetings with the applicant, we made it clear this does abut a large amount of single-family residential zoning, so buffering is a key concern from staff standpoint, and I think Zoning Commission would probably share that. Also, with all the improvements being made to the site, we've seen very little done on the Colerain Avenue frontage, which also, from our perspective, I think is of importance. So with that, we are recommending for the zoning map amendment, but the requests or conditions that staff is suggesting is that, number one, the B2 portion of the site, the general business, be included with the PDB. That's sort of a premise with planned developments, and we have a few of these around Colerain, where only a portion of a site is zoned planned development, the rest is single letter zoning. We saw that with the Joseph Toyota? Yeah. Site. However, the PDB part of that was much, much smaller in comparison with the overwhelming majority being B2. In this particular case, the overwhelming majority is planned development business, and only a small portion, but in my mind probably the most important portion, which is the front door to Colerain Avenue, is being left B2. So what I'm suggesting is that they include everything and come up with a more comprehensive plan that addresses everything. Secondly, that the loading of inventory, including vehicles, be done on the project site only. You will note on their plan they did specify a place to do on-site loading and unloading. That's something I would hope that we could hold them to. Third, a detailed landscape plan be submitted for the property as part of the final development plan process. with streetscape plantings conforming to the requirements of 15.5.1 of the zoning resolution for both the Pool Road and the Colerain Avenue frontages of the property. That requires a 15-foot buffer strip, streetscape buffer strip with tree plantings. Fourth, that no off-premise signage be allowed on the property. And also that the existing non-conforming billboard structure be removed. Signage on Pool Road shall be prohibited with the exception of the driveway signs per section 15.8.3E. And lastly, and this actually was not in your staff report, but I think it goes without saying that a final development plan has to be submitted. Just to make you aware that this is not the final stage in the process. So with that, and also the variances, because this is a inventory lot versus a customer lot, I do believe it's a reasonable request for a variance from 14.6.2 to allow for the elimination of the internal landscape tree islands in the parking areas shown on the preliminary development plan. Secondly, that a variance be granted from 13.4.2D for those parking spaces without direct access to the parking aisles, that the final development plan shall comply with other aspects of the regulations of the zoning resolution. And third, that existing vegetation be retained to serve as screening materials in the areas shown as submitted on the landscape plan as substitution for evergreen plantings per section 15.5 or 14.5.2B1. And with all that said, this is a planned development, so we are making zoning decisions based on a specific plan and a specific use. Just as a kind of a side comment, if this were a different nature of a commercial use being proposed, if it were an active restaurant, an active something that would probably go late into the evening, have lots of car traffic, I would probably have much more concern. A auto inventory lot, by its nature, they basically park cars there and they just sit until they need to be moved. There's not quite as much noise and activity, particularly in like evening hours or more disturbing hours, than you would have with other types of more active businesses. So I guess the idea is consider the character and the nature of what the type of operation is that's being proposed. With that said, staff has some concerns, but we're recommending for approval to move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Kaler. Before we hear from the applicant, commissioners, any comments or questions for staff? How did this applicant, did they buy all of the Moose property, or is there some Moose property still purchased?
This accounts for all of the Moose property now.
Okay.
I believe previously they started out leasing part of the Moose property, then they bought the entire Moose property while the Moose Lodge was still in operation.
Okay.
I got a question. How many residents will be affected by this change?
I believe there's about 6 single-family homes that physically touch this property.
And it's not a problem with traffic for these residents getting in and out?
The traffic comes out onto Pool Road. Let me get back to the, does that do it? Nope. One more. Yep. Where's the overall site? If I get my pointer. Where I'm kind of pointing, that's Sunnyside Drive, and it enters into Pool Road. So then they take Pool Road out to Colerain Avenue. The traffic for the auto dealer comes directly off of Pool Road and does not come off of Sunnyside Drive. So Sunnyside Drive itself is not impacted by traffic.
Okay.
How do we enforce what they've already not done? I mean, if we grant them this variance, they've already pretty much did what they wanted to the first time.
That's a
I don't
concern.
have a problem with the variance or to do this, but not if it's gonna turn out the way this first phase has.
Right. Unfortunately, I never had occasion to pull out the 2002 plan to review it until we first started conversations, and that's when all this started coming to light. Had I known that, we would have issued zoning violation notices on this. Being locked into a development plan, they have to go through final development plan, then they have to go through building department and all that for construction, and all of these conditions stay attached. But with like any development plan, it takes routine going out, making sure that there's continued compliance. And quite honestly, if they unload cars on Pool Road, the police can ticket the drivers if we instruct them to do so.
I'm not so much concerned about the cars being unloaded, that's an issue, but when they're parking cars on sidewalks and on the green space, and we're trying to make this look nice, and they're parking cars on it and all the way out into to the sidewalk.
Right. Well, my thought is if they had planted the trees and the shrubs and all that, they wouldn't be parking cars on it. So I think the key is get that landscaping in so it's not apt to become overflow parking. Now, that overflow parking also indicates they probably have a need for additional space because they probably had filled up every available space on the asphalt before they started parking in the grass.
That's just the thing with the dealers. If you give them space for 400, they're gonna put 500 in there.
So how many cars will actually be stored there at that location?
I don't know if I have that number. It's in the plans. The applicant can probably come up with that number. I just don't recall off the top of my head what the additional number of spaces were.
Any other questions for staff, comments?
No, I would just like to second Mr. Faring here with my concern on the parking on the green space and the sidewalks. That's terrible business practice to me.
Okay, does the applicant have a representative? If you could state your name, sir, and spell your last name and your address, please.
Yes, sir. Jim Watson, W-A-T-S-O-N. I'm an engineer with McGill Smith Punchin, 3700 Park 42 Drive, Suite 190B, Cincinnati 45241. With me here this evening is Paul, representing Jeff Wyler Dealer Group, is Paul Reaney, who's the Director of Operations for Jeff Wyler Dealer Group, and also Brian McNair, who is General Counsel for Jeff Wyler Dealer Group. Business is good at Colerain Honda, and they need more space. To answer one of the questions, how many cars are there and how many is there going to be?
Yeah.
At present, there are roughly 600 parking spaces, and that's vehicle storage, employee parking, customer parking. In total, we could get 600 cars on the property. And what this change would do is allow that to increase to approximately 800. And how we would get that on the parking lot that was formerly the Moose property, the way that's configured, we can get about 90 cars on that lot. So and it's not particularly efficient. So what we would do is rearrange the parking on the Moose lot. And then as you've seen in the plans, extend that further to the east. We would pave about an additional 1.25 acres. And the net change would be an additional 200 parking spaces.
So total, how many cars would that equal?
800.
800?
Yes, ma'am. Now, Mr. Kohler covered most aspects of the plan very well. And I won't rehash all of that. I'll rehash some of it. On where we adjoin the properties on Sunnyside Drive, once you get further back into the property that's the subject of the rezone, the evergreen buffer's pretty good. And it will supplement that a little bit with some deciduous trees, and then of course the solid board fence 6 foot high along the perimeter of the thing. But more toward the west end of Sunnyside, there's a distance about 300 feet or so where the buffer is not good. And so we're proposing to heavily landscape that area. In addition to doing that, where the pavement is closest to Sunnyside, we're going to actually remove some of the pavement and to increase the width of that buffer to something on the order of 35 feet, I believe it is. So we'll try to hide ourselves better than is being had, than is the condition now. As far as just speak a little bit to the lighting. You saw the photometric plan. 10 pole lights are 24 feet high. Trespass on the residential property to the north is 0.2 foot candles. Okay, and that measurement doesn't consider the screening, nor does it consider the fence. It'll knock it down a little bit. To the south side, it's 0.3 foot candles, but we're adjacent to property that's controlled by Northgate Ford. With regard to the streetscape, along Pool Road, there is a little bit of a buffer there, and Mr. Kohler indicated what we were proposing for landscaping was something less than what was done with the 2002 plan. One of the conditions here that we're talking about is conditions for approval would be to landscape the frontage of Pool Road in a manner that's consistent with the current streetscape, which I believe it's your section 14.5.1. We'll do that. And what we have there is probably if it doesn't meet that requirement, we'll beef it up such that it does. Where we are going to have an issue is along Colerain. Even the plan that was part of the 2002 submittal did not propose landscaping along Colerain, with the exception of some ornamental grass. If you look more toward the bottom half there, there's 2 curb cuts that go directly into the site, and the building is between those 2 curb cuts. In that area, there is a space of maybe 3 feet between the right-of-way line and the parking lot. And there's actually, as you go more to the north, that reduces to 0 feet. The sidewalk actually makes contact with the parking lot. In that area, there are 12 parking spaces, which are the best customer parking spaces we have on the property. And it just simply will not work out for us to have those spaces removed. However, what we can do is to the north, north of the building between let's say the north side of the building and Pool Road. That's an area that it's vehicle display and storage. And since we don't want our customers parking there, so what we can do is we can remove a row of parking and get the 15-foot minimum strip in which and then within that space landscape it in accordance with section 14.5.1. If you found that scenario to be acceptable, we would ask consideration to modify the approval condition accordingly. Now there's one other issue here, and that has to do with billboard sign. We don't know all the particulars with regard to Wyler's rights over the billboard sign, except to say one side of the sign always advertises Wyler. The other side probably never advertises Wyler. And what we can do is have both sides advertise Wyler. We cannot tell you that we can remove the billboard sign, in that Wyler doesn't have the rights to do that. They've got a lease commitment with Lamar. It's Lamar's sign. Wyler pays Lamar to advertise on the billboard. We don't necessarily know the terms of the lease. You know, is it got 20 years, 50 years? You know, how long is it before Wyler can force them to take the sign down? We don't know the answer to that. So, I mean, even if you make an approval condition to have the sign, the billboard removed, we can't remove it. So what we can do is buy advertising on the other side and have both sides of the sign of the billboard be specific to Jeff Wyler, Colerain Honda. Now, between now and in the trustees meeting, hopefully we can resolve what the long-term outlook of the billboard's going to be, how much time left on the lease, when is it that Wyler can, you know, take control of the thing and get the sign removed, you know, assuming that's available in their lease agreement. But we need a little more time to figure that out. In the meantime, our proposal would be to advertise on both sides of the sign. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
Commissioners?
I have one if no one else does. A letter on July 15th from the county engineer, specifically number 3. It appears that the proposed zoning change has no frontage along a public street. Has that been dealt with?
I've got that letter. Let me take a look at that.
What that refers to is that the actual rezoning area, if I get back to the rezoning map, the area that's being rezoned has, well, it technically has frontage on the end of Pool Road, but a very small amount. Sunnyside Drive's a private street. So from the county engineer standpoint, they're saying it has no frontage on one of their streets.
I'm thinking it's their way of saying that they don't have any jurisdiction on it, but I don't know. But it really doesn't matter if it whether it fronted on a public street or not. The fact of the matter is, the parcel, there's a panhandle along the south side of the property that fronts on Colerain. So it, you know, for all practical purposes, and especially since we're talking about rezoning the whole thing to planned district business, which we don't have an objection to. It really wouldn't change anything that we're doing, whether it's on a public street or not.
But it appears that they had 2 other concerns, and I'm not sure if they were addressed.
Who's this now?
County engineer.
Well, they had 3 concerns here that I can
Correct.
see. And we're not grading in the right of way. They're telling us if we did so, that it had to conform to their typical section. Well, we're not grading in their right of way, so that doesn't apply. We're not clearing in the right of way. That doesn't apply. No landscaping, screening, or obstruction shall be permitted in the public right of way. We agree with that. We don't want to put it in the public right of way, and we won't. And then comment 3, I don't know what to make of comment 3, except it doesn't affect this application in any way.
Okay, what's the time of day they will be unloading and loading cars? You said the residents, it shouldn't be a concern of residents because there's not that many, but what time of day will they unload and load cars?
I don't imagine it would happen all times of the day, right? Loading and unloading, it could, you know, do you do night delivery? No. So it's during regular business hours. We've indicated on that, and Marty's pointing it out there, where we're making a condition there that the offloading of vehicles will occur within that corridor. And I have a feeling that Mr. Rainey will be giving his staff marching orders regarding several of these issues, including parking in the grass, parking on the sidewalk, vehicle haulers being out in the public street, that kind of thing. I'm sure that that's going to trickle down very quickly.
Right, I would hope so, because in my opinion, this is a new Colerain compared to the 2002, where we not only demand more of ourselves, but more of the businesses that operate here. We're trying very hard to get more sidewalks built into the township, and to have parking happening on an existing sidewalk, perhaps damaging it, just creates a new challenge for us. So I respectfully ask to
Someone in
that
my
sidewalk
position
with
is definitely not a
TLC.
plus. It'd been a lot better without it. And I would encourage you, give them a violation.
I myself would like to see some more about the billboard. I find it hard to believe that you've gone to this extent with planning and everything else, and nobody at Jeff Wyler knows the deal with the lease on a sign.
I understand.
I don't buy it.
I know.
But we need to find out with that. We are trying to get rid of these obnoxious signs on Colerain Avenue and make it look nicer, and that is one of the big violators right there. I understand if they had a lease with them, but we need to find out what that is, and how that can be dealt with. Putting Jeff Wyler on both sides doesn't make it any better for us in the community with what we're trying to do with the signage.
I would point out, though, in the 2002 plan, that was a condition.
I
that
understand
Jeff
that.
Wyler on both
I understand
sides.
that. But now you're asking us to bend other rules too, with variances and all that. So we're trying to work both ways.
Whose property does that sign actually sit on?
It's on Wyler's property.
It's on Wyler's property.
It's like any other billboard. I mean, this is pretty common for billboards, where you basically sign your rights away to Lamar or someone similar, and then it becomes theirs. So all we can do now for sure is buy the space on the other side, and then we'll make a very strong effort to find out the details on how long the thing has to stay there.
Commissioners, any other questions or comments for this gentleman?
No.
Hearing none, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We may come back to you.
Yes, sir.
Hearing none, we need a motion to open for public hearing to allow those who have come this evening to maybe express their views. Could we have a motion, please?
So moved.
I'll second that.
Okay, Mr. Urbancic, would you call roll, please?
Mr. Faring,
Yes.
Ms. McMullen,
Yes.
Mrs. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Westfall,
Aye.
Mr. Grady.
Yes, motion is passed, so we are in public session. The paper that was given to me, there are two names on it. Mr. Clevidence, would you come forward, please, sir? And state your name and your address, and please spell your last name for the record's purposes.
My name is Jack Clevidence. It's Clevidence. I live at 9111 Zollner. Some things if you go back to the plot you had up there in green, that showed the overhead layout.
Let's see. One in green.
Sir, if you could help me while he's looking for that, where is Zollner in relation to the other streets we're talking about?
That's what I was going to show you. Their property abuts up to our property on Zollner Road to the east. We addressed everything north, south, west, but it's going to impact us on the east side also. We have some pictures here of the runoff in the creek that totally exists now. It's exposing sewer lines. It's probably made the small stream in the back probably 10 to 15 times wider than it was with the erosion. And this is going to cause additional runoff to where they want to show where the asphalt and everything goes. We have pictures of just the rain tonight, how it affects us. and he has some figures on how much water output. But some of the other things, that comes all the way back. The lighting and everything is going to be halfway down Mrs. Creech's property. That's going to be additional noise. I know it's only business hours, but all day long we hear people hitting the panic button so they can find a car. That's only going to increase with 200 more cars on there. And the lighting. And the other thing, we've had trouble in the past with people cutting through. Well, since that's all grown up in the back, and since the Moose put up fences, we haven't had any problem. They're going to clear that out. We're going to have additional problems with trespassers cutting through to the subdivision. And it just seems like you rezone for the Target. We're paying the price for that from the water runoff and the garbage that comes across our bridge. We have flooding down there. We're going to have the same thing if it's not addressed here. It just seems like everything keeps moving into the residential areas. So we're concerned about the intrusion into our residential area. I've lived there since 1970, and we're just getting squeezed out. Privacy, noise pollution, and then I think Mr. Nagel here has some very good photographs to show you. So.
Okay. Who has these photographs, sir? Could you show them to us, sir?
I don't have a fancy screen like you do up there, but I do have a folder here with some photographs. I'm on the list to speak later. Do you want me to come up now, or?
If need be, we'd like to see at least a delay. We haven't had much time to see any figures on
I mean, if,
the runoff for the civil engineer, or even possibly legal help. Because, I mean, I know they propose an ice fence and everything, but we see what the ice fence looks like from over at Joseph Toyota. It's an eyesore. So, but our property is affected. It abuts right up to our property line, right to the fence. It'll be less than probably 50 feet from the house. So that's my concerns. Thank you.
okay, Mr. Nagel, if you'd like to come forward, please. And again, if you'd state your name and your address and spell your last name for us.
My name is Alfred Nagel, Nagel, and I live at 9109 Zollner Drive. And my property is at the end of your yellow line there. I'm right, my side yard's your backyard, well, his backyard. And what I have concern with is the water retention. Your swimming pool that's going to be collecting from the parking lot. I've got some figures here that you're proposing a 300,000 square feet parking now, right? And that's where all the water's going to be draining off into. I'm right.
Correct.
Okay. And that will, if you get 1 inch of rain, that equals 187,500 gallons that's going to be dumped into your little swimming pool back there. And that much water will fill a swimming pool 100 feet by 50 feet by 5 feet deep. And we get more than 1 inch rain at a time sometimes. So all that water that's going to go in the back there for retention will eventually go down through the Ford parking lot, or not the parking lot, their woods, and end up into the creek. And we are getting so many businesses that are dumping into the creek. We've moved in there in 1968. I was 11 years old, and that creek was so shallow, you could jump across it with no problem. We had baby ducks that the baby ducks were able to swim in the creek, and they were able to get out of the bank. I can't get out of the bank now. The water is that deep. I have the pictures. You want to see pictures? Who would like to see these pictures?
Bring them forward. We can share them among ourselves.
These are the pictures I took yesterday, and then some pictures were taken today after the rain that we had.
Hey, Fred, can you show the one that's exposing the sewer lines?
Yeah. There's one there that has like, well, that's, I believe you have it in this hand here, that concrete. That was a sewer line that Jack Clevidence had put, that tapped into the sewer. And it had to be 3 feet below because of the freeze line. It's exposed. He put concrete over it to cover it up. That's how much our creek is eroded away already. And there's a sewer.
Manhole.
Yeah, that used to be completely underground. Our creek is so wide and so deep now. And all these parking lots that they're building, where Furniture Fair is now, that used to be Zares when they first opened up. And before that, it was 3 lakes. And those lakes drained in one into another, and then finally it went into our creek. When Zares built it, when it rained like that, it just, I don't think they have any kind of a retention whatsoever. It just comes straight into our creek. I was able to float down, body surf down our creek when I was a kid. That's just not right. You know, something's got to be done. You can't just keep putting parking lots.
So this is tonight?
That was tonight, yeah. And my dad, there's a fence, you can see a fence that goes across the creek. My dad put that in there. And the concrete that had set, the pole, the ground's gone. It washed away. So the fence is just dangling there now. You know, I know they wanted to put the parking lot there, but I say you have to do something else about the drainage from all this. And we're going to have to address, you know, what's happened in the past, because pretty soon we'll catch up with the Grand Canyon, you know. And I don't want people coming in my yard to look at this sightseeing, you know.
Have you had any flooding?
That's a joke, but huh?
Have you had any flooding at your property because of this?
The creek, yeah, you can see how the creek is flooded, and it washed away. You know, years ago, it used to go 20, 30 feet wide, but now it's so deep, now it can't come up over the, but it's just getting deeper and wider every year.
Okay, anything else, sir?
No,
Okay.
that was my concern.
When they're finished with the pictures, we'll have staff take a look at those too.
Okay, you can come on our property and take a look at it yourself. I'm not going to get you for trespassing. I mean, it's bad. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Are there any other persons who wanted to speak to this issue? Yes.
I don't know if I should register as an alternate commissioner or not to speak. I'd like to speak to this issue.
I'm not sure what the protocol is there, Mr. Kohler. Usually when I became an alternate, I wasn't able to speak.
Yeah, if you're seated, you can speak, but you're not seated tonight.
So I lose my citizenship as a Colerain County person when I...
That's, I think we should permit him to speak as a Colerain resident and make that clear that it's
You'd like to
not
come
as a
forward?
zoning commission member.
My name's Bruce Gary, alternate commissioner, but citizen of Colerain Township. And like I say, I didn't register because I didn't know if I'd be sitting up there. I'm going to urge you to not approve this request, and I'll tell you why. If you'll take a look at your packet on the last page, they quote, and this is from staff, that the property south of the Moose Lodge is a vacant 5+ acre tract that is owned by adjacent Northgate Ford dealership. We talked about that before. This property is also zoned R6, okay? The next tract to the south is Strip Shopping Center, anchored by Furniture Fair, that is zoned B2. If the zoning request, this one, okay, to rezone the former Moose property to a business classification, it would open the possibility of a zoning request from Northgate Ford. So really what you're looking at here is not necessarily just this piece of property we are for this case. We're looking for the whole strip of land. I am very concerned as a resident of Colerain Township of the loss of residencies, because we're a community of residents first, businesses second. I support businesses, but you just saw two very long-term residents that came up here and talked about their deep concerns. My second reason for this is for 17 years, this dealership has shown a disdain for following the rules. Yes, maybe our staff just became aware that there was a violation, but certainly Wyler knew of these because they were given the conditions. Why would we even consider giving them an approval with conditions when we know 3 out of 5 conditions they had on them they totally disregarded? Okay? Why would we have any expectation that they would follow, as Mr. Faring said, what conditions we put on them now? So until they're able to demonstrate over time, remember they've had 17 years now, but if they can demonstrate over time that they can follow conditions, i.e. the conditions that they agreed to back in 2002, then possibly, be it a year from now or 2 years from now, maybe we would consider the possibility of expansion. And keep in mind, this isn't a 17-year problem that, oh, maybe somebody else did. If you take a look right below the conditions, the 5 conditions that are on the property right now, and again, this is from the staff report, it says, in 2016, the applicant purchased the remainder of the former Moose Lodge and began parking inventory cars on the former lot, which is not permitted. As the signs you saw up here, the slides you saw up here, right now, they are non-conforming because they know the Moose Lodge is someplace they cannot park their cars, yet they're doing it anyway. This is a business that shows they're going to do whatever they want to do despite what you say. I think you need to take that in consideration, and I urge you not to approve this, or at the very least, extend this. Give the residents time, 3 months, 4 months, to sit down and understand in more detail as they request. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, sir. Are there any other persons who wish to address this issue? Okay. Hearing none, we need a motion to close our public hearing.
So move. Second.
Been moved and seconded to close public hearing. Mr. Urbanzik, would you call roll?
Mr. Faring?
Yes.
Faring?
Yes.
Ms. McMullen?
Yes.
Mrs. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Westfall?
Aye.
Mr. Grady?
Yes. Okay. Okay, having heard all of this information and so on and so forth, commissioners, do you have any additional comments or questions of anyone who spoke or the gentleman who's representing the applicant?
I got a question for Steph. How do we notify the residents that there's going to be a project that could affect them?
We send mailed notices of this public hearing to all the abutting property owners. Whenever we have public hearings, that's our standard course, is we advertise it in a newspaper general circulation, and we also send direct mailed notices.
Because at one time, I thought they had a situation where they put a sign out for the public and anybody else that was interested in seeing that to know what was going on around them. Is that still done?
No, that is not.
Okay.
So just to clarify, the abutting properties, that was Sunnyside and Zollner were
Correct.
notified.
I will allow it. Mr. Watson, you had raised your hand. Was there some comment you wanted to make?
Yeah, I just, thank you. I wanted to speak to the issue of stormwater runoff. It seemed like it was a big issue for the two residents that spoke, and it's, I think it's important for everyone to have an understanding of what we're proposing to do here. In total, the detention basin that you're looking at there on screen now, it receives runoff from the existing Moose lot as well as the one that we propose to build. In total, it's about 2¼ acres of pavement. Do the math on that, it's 100,000 square feet of paved area that will be draining to that detention basin. The basin is sized, and just to talk apples to apples, there was some commentary about the volume of runoff, and I don't recall what the figure was, but per inch of runoff on 2.25 out on 100,000 square feet, it's going to be about 62,000 gallons of runoff. That detention basin that we're proposing there has the capacity of 225 gallons of storage. It's 30,000 cubic feet. In the event of a 100-year rainfall event, the release rate from that detention basin would be less than one would experience during a 1-year rainfall event. We're containing the difference between 1 year today and 100 year after the thing is developed. You'll see on the diagram a line that's pointing to the southeast. That's the discharge pipe from the detention basin. It's pointing toward the creek that they were talking about. The creek at this property has a watershed of 120 acres. And a lot of that's developed, and a lot of that is developed without benefit of detention. Of that 120 acres, we're going to contribute 2.25, and it's going to have detention to the extent that it exceeds any of the requirements that Hamlin County or any other jurisdiction might ask us to provide. So I think we're doing what we're supposed to. In fact, we're doing more than we're supposed to with regard to stormwater management in this situation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Kaler, if I may ask you, do you have any further clarification on the sign issue of our requirement being recommended that it come down? Can we in fact do that, or what is your feel on that?
There is apparently a lease agreement. Lease agreements tend to have termination clauses in them. My suggestion is that they look at how to execute that termination clause and take down the billboard sign. That's my recommendation.
One other question, Mr. Kaler, in relation to what our residents were sharing with us of their concerns and so on and so forth. Will any of that be addressed in the final development plan that would possibly come before us?
It would, but not necessarily in a lot more detail than what has been submitted. They did submit their stormwater detention calculations, which is a lot of engineering formulas. I did not include that in your packet. It's not a zoning requirement. That's more a soil and water conservation requirement. But what Mr. Watson is saying is true, that a large amount of impervious surface is being captured into a detention pond, and the outflow should be less than what would be expected at the pre-development, being grass and whatever else, into the creek. There's a couple of sort of fallacies with that. It does decrease the impact of flooding with the creek. It does not reduce the volume. As a matter of fact, the amount of water going into the creek is much larger. It's just going in at a much slower rate over a longer period of time. So that area that it's draining across will be wet or damp for much longer than it would with a torrential rainfall. Also, I mean, they're talking about these problems with the creek today without this particular development. This particular development should not further impact this degree of flooding that you're seeing. That impact is things like when Furniture Fair or whatever the predecessor was, there were no stormwater detention requirements for those older developments. So 100% of that runoff is rapidly going into these creeks. short of them going in and redeveloping that land, we have no zoning leverage to require stormwater detention on those older developments. But over time, that would be the desirable goal, is to start taking those large parking lots and either just doing away with asphalt and replacing with with permeable surface, or doing a better job at retaining stormwater. The Target development back in 2002, they were required to build a sizable stormwater detention basin. Again, they're capturing, there's more runoff going into the creek, but over a longer extended period of time.
Is that creek flowing north to south?
I believe it's south to north at that location.
East.
West to east.
Yeah, it kind of wraps around. I wish I had a bigger map with that. It kind of squiggles, but the part that's directly to the east, I believe, goes mostly north to south, or south to north. Not correct.
No, west to east.
West to east.
So there are other entities that are adding to the amount of water in that creek.
Correct. Anything that's on the east side of Colerain Avenue is going into that creek.
Okay.
So where does it ultimately end?
I don't know the route of it. It eventually gets into the West Fork of Mill Creek. It's in that drainage basin.
Okay, commissioners, any other questions or comments for anyone who has spoken this evening? Okay, before I ask for a motion, Mr. Kaler, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm thinking that we, as a commission, could make a motion to approve this and pass it. We could make a motion to deny it and pass that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we could make a motion to table this for some period of time if we felt that was the right thing to do. Is that correct, or am I incorrect?
You are correct. I believe there's a limit after, pardon me, I got to do a quick research, but I think you have some time restrictions as to when you need to take some action. Let me check. Like I say, different boards and different types of actions require actions within certain timeframes. Yeah, within 30 days after your public hearing, you need to take action to, let me read this. You would recommend approval with modifications, or denial. So you basically have 30 days from tonight
That,
to take an action, not being tabled. Approval with conditions, or denial.
okay.
Does our next scheduled meeting meet that timeline?
Your next meeting is on the 17th, yeah, of September. That would put you right at the end. The question is, when you table, what additional information is it that you need to come to a decision that you have not heard tonight?
Personally speaking, it's not necessarily additional information, but more time for the applicant and your office to maybe work out some of the issues that were raised tonight before they bring this back. And I would assume it'd be brought back as a preliminary development plan as opposed to.
Correct. Yeah, you have to take action on a preliminary before.
That's what I'm feeling.
Yeah,
Like-
and it has to, whatever your recommendation is just a recommendation to the township trustees. The township trustees will hold their own public hearing, and they have those same options. They can take your recommendation, they can change the conditions, or the township trustees could also deny.
Or they could approve
Correct,
what's recommended tonight.
correct.
I just wanted to get that clarified for fellow commissioners, So at this time, if there are no other questions or comments, we're ready to entertain a motion for this case that is at hand, if someone is prepared to make that motion.
I make a motion that we deny it.
I'll second it.
Okay, I heard the motion. Who made it? Who seconded it?
I'll second it.
Okay.
And that's case ZA 2002-2, zoning map amendment.
Okay. Is there any further question or comment regarding the motion made?
I would like to make a comment on it. I'm not totally against this, but with the track record of who's in here with us and ignoring what was done in the previous, I would have to see it go on a few months, see them come clean on the other issues that were ignored before I would be willing to vote, yes on something like this. There's just too many items. The sign, the parking on the sidewalks, there's just so many items that have just been thrown back at us and ignored. So that's my feeling.
Again, I'll ask you to tell me if I'm wrong, but if this motion passes that we deny it, it doesn't mean for the applicant that it's a dead issue. They can bring it back again.
They would have to actually submit a brand-new application.
Okay. Okay, fellow commissioners, any other comments or questions?
Oh, yeah. It brings up a good point. Your denial does get sent to the trustees for their confirmation. So the trustees could reverse that.
Okay, all right. Okay, hearing none, Mr. Urbanzik, could we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Faring,
Yes.
Ms. McMullen,
Yes.
Mrs. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Westfall,
Yes.
Mr. Grody.
Yes. So the motion or the issue has been denied. Okay. We move on to case ZA 2019-05, 2529 to 2507 Compton Road. Staff, do we have a report?
Yes, we do. This is also a rezoning request. The property is currently zoned B1, which is a neighborhood commercial district. The request is to rezone to a B2 district. Property 2507, 2529 Compton Road. This is on the south side of Compton Road. It's east of Pippin. This property is in a couple parcels. It is 1.4 acres. Does have frontage on Compton Road. An issue that shows up well on this map, the North Fork of Mill Creek actually runs through this property. It kind of bisects the property. And it does have a FEMA floodplain associated with that. You can see the building is located very close to the right-of-way of Compton Road. The part that is on the south side of the creek is a very steep hillside going up to a residential subdivision. This is the zoning map. The properties on either side on Compton Road are zoned also B1 neighborhood business. The property to the rear is R6, which is urban residential. Across the street is the B1 neighborhood commercial. And kind of catty corner across the street is also R6. This is a photograph of the property. There is a non-conforming billboard on the property. Really doesn't have much impact on this. But the pavement that's in front of that building, at least more than half of that is considered right-of-way of Compton Road. This is looking both east and west. The top one's to the west. It's a recycling business, also in a very similar kind of strip-looking commercial building. That building also backs onto the creek, and then to the east, where those trees are, is actually the creek crossing under Compton Road. And then further to the east, there's a La Rosa's restaurant and some other commercial-type buildings. These buildings were all built prior to Colerain zoning. There's a lot of nonconformities. For instance, across the street, there's a single-family house. It's zone B1 business. There's also an auto repair shop that's been in business since before Colerain zoning, and that's a non-conforming use. Then there's a single-family house on the same lot that's behind that business across the street. The applicant has presented some plans with the property. The intent is to do auto repair and auto sales, and those are only permitted in the B2 zone, not in the B1 zone. So that is the desire for the rezoning of the property. This shows the zoning classifications, again, the applicant's information. This shows the layout for the proposed parking. It's a little difficult. If this were a new parking lot, we would require a 15-foot setback from the right-of-way. This shows the parking actually on the right-of-way. The pavement is in existence now, so it's kind of a non-conformity. We're not talking about a planned district, so we are basically accepting the non-conformities with the straight letter zoning. So this arrangement could be considered permissible. Then the building, this is a floor plan showing the use. Part of it would be devoted to the auto sales and part of it to the auto service. There's some exterior elevation drawings, how they propose to treat the building. Staff's recommendation is for denial of this request. The rationale is that this would be a freestanding island of B2 in an area that's currently all B1. B1 zoning is a zoning district that you typically find as a more neighborhood-centered type business. They tend to be more pedestrian-oriented and direct neighborhood service. Things like auto sales, it's not like you impulse buy or walk to the corner auto store to buy your car. It's something you go to in a more heavily traveled area like Colerain Avenue. Compton Road's considered a collector street versus Colerain Avenue is a major arterial. In your staff report, I outlined the definition distinctions between a B1 and a B2 district. This particular site, even though it's more than an acre, which is the minimum for a commercial site, the actual amount of land you can see is the area out of the blue that fronts on Compton. That is the actual usable area of this site. If a building were to be built on that site, it would have to conform to a 50-foot setback from the right-of-way. That would put the building in the creek. So there's some nonconformities here. The concern is if that building were ever damaged or destroyed, it'd be very difficult to do a reconstruction on the site without major variances being granted.
because of the impact of that creek. So there are some site issues that, in our mind, does not warrant an intensification of zone classification to go above the current B1 standard. The applicant is here. I'm sure they would like to make a presentation on this.
Thank you, Mr. Kohler. Commissioners, any questions or comments from staff? Okay. Would the applicant like to address us, please? And again, if you'd state your name, spell your last name, and your address, please.
My name is Blair Sarble, last name S-A-R-B-A-L. Address is 6158 Beckett Station Court. What we want to do is open up a pet business. It doesn't necessarily have to be the auto sales. If it gets denied, we're thinking something in the commercial zone where it would have to do with automotive, either a car detailing or car accessories or a small mechanic shop. Currently, right next door is the recycling place, and across the street is an already functioning automotive shop. So we seen that, and we just assumed that it would be okay.
Okay. Commissioners, questions or comments for our applicant? Mr. Kaler, in light of what this gentleman said, if they wanted to do an automotive repair place or something, does that still require a different zoning?
That would require a B2 zoning classification.
Okay.
The only auto-related use, oddly enough, that is considered neighborhood-based is a gas station. Is permitted, but no other type of repair or sales.
Okay. Thank you, sir. At this time, we need to entertain a motion for open public hearing. If I could have a motion, please. Is that you, Mr. Westfall?
Yes.
Okay. A second, please.
I'll second that.
Okay. Mr. Banzik, would you call roll, please?
Mr. Farring,
Yes.
Ms. McMullen,
Yes.
Mrs. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Westfall,
Aye.
Mr. Grady.
Yes. Is there anyone present who would like to address this issue? Hearing none, we need a motion to close public hearing.
So move.
I'll second that.
Okay. Mr. Banzik, would you call roll, please?
Mr. Farring,
Yes.
Ms. McMullen,
Yes.
Mrs. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Westfall,
Aye.
Mr. Grady.
Yes. Commissioners, we're at the point where think we're ready to entertain a motion for this matter that's at hand. Would someone be willing to make a motion one way or the other?
I make a motion that we reject case number ZA 2014-0. Oops, am I on the wrong one? Case number ZA 2019-05, 2529, 2507 Compton Road, as it was presented.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. So it has been moved and seconded to adhere to the recommendation made by staff. Is that correct?
Correct.
That is, okay. Any further questions, comments by commissioners? Hearing none, if Mr. Banzik, if you would call roll.
Mr. Farring,
Yes.
Ms. McMullen,
Yes.
Mrs. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Westfall,
Aye.
Mr. Grady.
Yes. Sorry, gentlemen, your application is denied. Okay. All right, moving on. Mr. Kaler, anything for items 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10?
Just to let you know, we have had a resignation of our zoning director for Colerain Township. That position was posted, and we've received applications that are currently in the review process. Hope to have a selection made very shortly, and get somebody on board. You do not have a application for the September meeting, so actually your next meeting will then be October 15th instead of September 17th.
Okay.
And we do believe that we will be receiving applications for that meeting. It seems to be we have feast or famine, unfortunately, on that.
Any comments from commissioners or questions or anything? Fine. Could we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll second that.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion is carried. We are adjourned. If everybody will turn off